Today on CityCast Austin, call them school vouchers, education savings account, or coupons, the idea of the state subsidizing private education really roused Texans up. In 2023, Governor Greg Abbott and many Republicans were gung-ho on passing some sort of voucher system, while Democrats and some Republicans steadfastly and successfully opposed them. But there's no doubt that the topic will be back before lawmakers in January. So to prepare, I'm talking to Austin's Rep. James Tallarico, a Democrat and former school teacher on the Public Education Committee. CityCast Austin is brought to you by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tecovas. It's Tuesday, September 10th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I'm here today with Representative James Tallarico, an Austin Democrat, and we're talking about education in Texas and school vouchers. Hey, James, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me here.
I want to talk a little bit about your educational background because I started out when I was younger, I was homeschooled, but it was done in a very hippy-dippy way. It was like me and a bunch of other little brown kids were all homeschooled by this one former educator because, my parents just thought I wasn't getting a great education on the East Side.
Sure.
And my mom couldn't afford it for long. I was really small. Then I had to go to public school like everybody else. But I will say that, and my mom says also that time being homeschooled really shaped the way I learned when I went to public school, the way I socialized when I went to public school. There are all these implications that come with kind of the mixed way we come through the education system. So I'm curious about your educational background. Did you attend public school? Where did you attend public school? And how was that for you?
Yeah. And thank you for sharing your experience. We have some overlap in our stories. I was born to a single mom here in Austin. We lived in an apartment off Berkman, also on the East Side. And, she worked at hotels to try to provide for the two of us. One day we met Mark Tallarico, who became my adoptive dad, and we moved up to Wells Branch. So I got to go to Wells Branch Elementary School, Deer Park Middle School, McNeil High School, all in Round Rock ISD, which is one of the best public school districts in the state. And I have no doubt that I would not be on this podcast with you, wouldn't be serving an elected office if it wasn't for those great public schools. My mom didn't get to go to college. And so the fact that I graduated from UT and then Harvard University, like that was beyond her wildest imagination, for a single mom from Laredo. So, the reason I fight so hard for public schools is because I know the potential. But when you mentioned in your story was that your mom felt like you did not have a great public school option. And that should be unacceptable, right? In a democracy like ours, in a wealthy country like ours, every single child should have the option to attend a great public school. Everyone should have a great public school in their neighborhood. Everyone should have access to a great public school teacher. Our public schools have a lot of challenges, but we've got to strengthen public education for everybody in this state. What I'm worried is that this voucher project, this voucher scam, is distracting from that effort. It's hurting that effort to strengthen public schools for all of us.
So right off top, can you explain what school vouchers are for the folks maybe who don't know?
So a voucher is really any time you're taking public tax dollars out of public schools and giving them to private schools. And these take lots of different forms, and they come in all different shapes and sizes, and they have different names. Sometimes you hear educational savings account as one form. Sometimes the voucher is handed directly to the parent. So there's lots of different iterations across the country and really throughout history. But at its most fundamental level, it's any time you're taking dollars that would otherwise go to a public school and you're sending them to a private school, oftentimes a religious private school.
So tell us about the history of education voucher programs in Texas.
The first voucher was proposed in our state in 1957. And for the history buffs who are listening, they know that was just 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision came down from the Supreme Court. So that first voucher program that was proposed in 57 in the Texas legislature was a deliberate attempt to resegregate public schools, to allow white students to leave newly integrated public schools and go to white-only private schools. And every decade that they've been brought up in Texas, they've been shot down, thankfully. Bipartisan coalitions of Republicans and Democrats, rural and urban and suburban. Everybody has kind of been on the same page that we want to fully fund public schools. And nothing wrong with private schools. If people want to make that choice, they can pay for that. But taxpayers aren't going to pay for anything but these schools that we fund together in our neighborhoods. And so the latest iteration of vouchers have also failed. They failed last year several times. Democrats and Republicans came together to stop them. And then we've had hearings on vouchers yet again, and they'll probably be brought up next year in the session.
How big of an issue are school vouchers leading into this next legislative session?
It's probably the top issue for your listeners who don't follow the Texas legislature. We meet every other year, so years that end in an odd number, and we meet for about 5 months from January to Memorial Day at the end of May. And we may come back if a special session is called. The only person who can call a special session is the governor of Texas. And so, we'll be back in January for the regular session. And I expect that private school vouchers will be at the top of the governor's priority list.
Speaking of which, so 2023, vouchers, they just couldn't get it passed in the Texas legislature, not during the regular session or even in several special sessions.
That's right.
I'm curious about what that never-ending fight was like for you, especially since you're also on the Public Education Committee. What is this never-ending back and forth like for you?
It's like Groundhog Day, if you've ever seen that movie, where I'm just waking up and it's the same thing every day. It is exhausting and discouraging because we should be having conversations as Democrats and Republicans about how to improve public schools. How do we get the best teachers in the classroom? How do we get the smartest, toughest high school students who want to become teachers? How do we make the profession so attractive that instead of wanting to go to business school or law school or medical school, you want to become a teacher in this state?
Right.
You want to become a teacher in this country. Why don't we pay all of our teachers 6 figures? I can start solving some of these problems right here, right? Instead of using some of this money on voucher scams, why don't we use this to provide more programs in our schools, to provide, college and career education in our schools, career and technical education, more blended learning and using technology in innovative ways and better curriculum, early childhood education, get kids started earlier in life. There are all things, summer enrichment programs, after school programs. There are all these things we know that work, right? We know there's nothing wrong with the kids. Kids are all born with the same level of smarts. God doesn't make junk. It is the problem with policymakers who are not investing and supporting these public schools to help those kids be the best version of themselves. It's not a problem with the kids. It's the problem with the politicians. And so, in my mind, it's discouraging because we're wasting our time on these silly side projects that are just going to hurt public schools rather than figuring out ways to strengthen it. At the same time, it's also an honor because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for public schools.
Right.
So I'm paying my debt by fighting for those teachers and those kids and making sure that they get everything they deserve.
So in the 2023 elections, Governor Greg Abbott ran opponents against Republican lawmakers who opposed the private school vouchers, and he spent like $6 million to do it. 6 of the 8 incumbents lost. Yeah. What do you think the governor's involvement in those races say to you?
I think, Greg Abbott got all that money from one out-of-state billionaire from Pennsylvania. So what tells me is that our governor is bought and paid for by his billionaire mega donors, and he will stop at nothing to implement their agenda, even if it means going after his fellow Republicans. I mean, these guys who voted against vouchers, they're not lefty Republicans. They're not moderate Republicans. They are dyed-in-the-wool conservatives.
Right.
Greg Abbott is going after the Republicans who don't sign on to this billionaire agenda of privatizing public schools.
There was recently a hearing at the Capitol to evaluate the use of education savings accounts in other states to then make recommendations for a Texas program, right? How did that go?
What we learned in that hearing was that the states that have tried these voucher scams have not seen improvements in student performance, but they have seen billions of dollars leaking out of the public education system and going to private schools and subsidizing wealthy parents who already had their kids in private school to begin with. So this is a recipe for disaster, and we've seen that in other states. Arizona passed a voucher scam a few years ago, and it has already blown up their state budget. Because it grows year to year and it starts to balloon in cost. And so I'm very worried about what would happen in Texas if we decide to pass one of these things.
How do you think vouchers are would affect Austin ISD?
I think they would be devastating for Austin ISD. Austin ISD is already struggling, especially when you talk about recapture or Robin Hood. Austin ISD is a high property wealth district, but we've got a lot of poor people. And so for the school finance system, we are kind of classified as rich. And so we have to send a lot of our money back to the state, and we don't keep that money here to serve the high needs that we have here. So we're already suffering under the current system. But if you add a voucher scam on top of that, where now you are handing over state dollars to wealthy families in Westlake and Lakeway so that they can subsidize their private schooling at St. Stephen's, I mean, that is reverse Robin Hood. That's taken from the poor and given to the rich. And as a Christian, as a former public school teacher, I think it's unacceptable. I think it's unconscionable that we would consider doing that. And so, you often hear this phrase, school choice. I believe in choice. I imagine many of your listeners do. All kinds of choice over your own body, choice who you marry, but also choice in education. One size doesn't fit all. And we have to build more choice within our public school system, more magnet schools, more academies, more early college high schools, more flexibility to go transfer between public schools. But these vouchers are not choice, because private schools in Texas can deny admission to any kid for any reason they want. They can deny admission because of your academics, because of your behavior, because your parents don't make enough money, or because you're not the right cultural fit, which I think we know what that means in a lot of different types of schools around the state.
Exactly.
So this idea of choice, it's not school choice, it's the school's choice, because the private schools get to decide who comes in and who doesn't. Public schools don't get to do that. Public schools take everybody. The last part is that the cost of the voucher doesn't even cover the full cost of tuition at most private schools.
I read that.
I used to teach on the west side of San Antonio, which is a beautiful, historic Mexican-American neighborhood. It's also one of the poorest zip codes in the state of Texas. If you gave my students on the west side an $8,000 voucher and told them that they could now go to a $20,000 a year private school, they're not going to have $12,000 to make up that difference. But that wealthy family on the other side of San Antonio in Alamo Heights, who are sending their kid to the $20,000 a year private school, they're going to take advantage of the $8,000 voucher because that's a coupon. So in the states that have tried these, what you see is that the vast majority of the funding for vouchers, 80%, 90%, ends up going to wealthier families who were already sending their kids to private school. It is welfare for the wealthy.
Ooh.
It's welfare for the well-off.
Wow.
That is what vouchers do.
The fact that it doesn't even cover tuition, then what are we doing here? Even if, let's just say, to your point, let's just say that your kids on the West Side were like, you know what? Okay, $8,000. We'll figure it out. We'll make up that $12,000. And they go to a private school. What type of school is that for them? Is their culture going to be recognized? Are they going to be able to learn in the way that makes the most sense for them?
Yeah.
You're literally just taking people's money.
And that money is now being taken out of the public school, which is making the public school worse, right?
Maybe something that is not being talked about is generational. So like we talk about my mother. My mother, she did what she had to do to put herself through college, right? But it was a hustle. It was like she had to work several jobs. Mm-hmm. She is the first person in her line to go to college. So she did all this so that I could then go to college, right? And my sister and I could get an education, and it kind of goes down. But, during that, I think that she genuinely at that time was like, if she could have had her way, if she wasn't working and going to school at the same time, she would have wanted me to have a private education. Absolutely. Sure. Just because she knew that it would set me up for a different type of success. I feel like we run the risk of this sounding really, really good because we know how the education system is kind of regressing. And so my fear is that someone like me or someone younger than me might hear this and like, yeah, I do want my kids to go to private school.
I think the vouchers prey on people's hopes and dreams for a great education.
That's where I'm going. Yeah.
But in the end, they're screwing you over. That's why I call it a scam.
That's it.
I want every person to have choice in their education. I want everyone to have access to a great public school. But this is not that.
Yeah.
And this is not for us. And there's also a narrative that is being pushed by politicians and these mega donors that public schools are terrible for everyone. Now, I know that public schools aren't perfect. I know that public school teachers aren't perfect.
Right.
But also we should push back against that idea because public schools do incredible, life-changing work every day.
Get out of my brain. Yes, that's right.
And in fact, during the pandemic, we saw that public schools in Texas recovered from COVID learning loss faster than anyone thought was possible, with limited resources.
Yeah.
So I truly believe, as a former public school teacher, as a former public school student, there is nothing that our public schools can't do if they are given the resources and the tools to be successful. There is nothing magical about a private school. They just have more funding and less testing, right?
You are in my brain.
We could give public schools more funding and less testing.
Yeah.
Right? And we could give them more freedom. Now, maybe you do want religious education and not just students learning about religion, but you want students to be brought up in one particular tradition. That's fine. It's a free country. But again, that's a choice you need to make on your own.
Exactly.
And then you need to pay for it.
Pay for it on your own. Y'all, can I tell you about these Tecovas boots? These boots are handmade, high quality, stylish, and comfortable right out the box. I know we buy everything online these days, but boots are something you really should get fitted for. And it just so happens that Tecovas is based right here in Austin. So grab a friend, head on over to the Tecovas flagship on South Congress or to their store at the Domain. Do you know what's better than shopping? Shopping with a beer. This is wild, but when you go in, a friendly person hands you a cold beer for free while you shop around. Tecovas will personalize your boots or anything else you buy with customized leather stamping. So come shop with me at the Tecovas store on South Congress or the Domain. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. You've spoken pretty openly about your religious background, and you were attending seminary to get your master's in divinity.
Yeah.
Are you officially a pastor?
No, still in school. Unfortunately, being a legislator and also working a full-time job and also being a full-time student, it takes a while. So
that's a lot.
It's only so many hours a day. Yeah, so I'm working my way through it, but I'm hopeful I'll get there eventually.
So Some say the vouchers are a way to help more children access religious education. But are you opposed to that? And if so, why?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me start by just telling you a little bit about my background. So my granddad was a Baptist preacher in South Texas. I've been going to the same church since I was 2 years old here in Austin. And now I'm in seminary, as you mentioned, studying to become a minister myself. So my faith is central in my life. And it's the reason I was a public school teacher. It's the reason I ran for office, trying to serve my neighbors, which is what I'm called to do in my faith tradition. And so this is a very important topic to me. And there are ways to teach students in public schools about the great faith traditions of the world. I think all students should learn about Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism, because you have to know about these world religions if you're going to understand literature, if you're going to understand history, if you're going to understand cultures, if you're going to enter into this global economy,
right?
And if you're going to live in this diverse state. Texas is one of the most diverse states in the country. You've got to be exposed to these things. That is different than preaching. And now I love preaching, right? But I know there's a difference between there's a difference between teaching and preaching, right? Teaching is not trying to convince you of anything. It's exposing you to things in a more objective way. It's academic. If we're teaching the Bible in a devotional way, if we're trying to convert students, now suddenly you have crossed the line into preaching. And so that is why we have this separation of church and state in our First Amendment, because we have a free exercise clause that says the government can't stop you from practicing your religion, whatever it may be. We also have an establishment clause in that First Amendment, which prohibits the government from establishing a state religion. In other words, elevating one religion over the rest.
Right.
That's the most American ideal. America was started by religious minorities fleeing religious persecution in Europe. And so this kind of idea of a multicultural, multiracial democracy is foundational. You know, we obviously didn't start that way, and we've struggled to realize that dream, but we've never stopped trying to get there. And so I believe that these private school voucher scams are an effort to blur the lines between church and state. If you look at where these vouchers are coming from, it's being pushed by, in particular, these two billionaire mega donors from West Texas, Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks. And they really increasingly control Texas politics and Texas state government. And these two billionaires they're oil and gas guys, but they're also Christian nationalist pastors. And so those that are close to Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks have said that their goal is to dismantle public education and replace it with private Christian schooling.
I won't speak for everyone, but the average everyday American citizen kind of forgets that, like, what is behind a lot of this push to regress or go back is money. Lots and lots and lots of money. And, you know, our future they're trying to determine the future, not just of us, but just like generation of kids based on the will of two men.
Yeah, I've been in public office for 6 years now, 3 terms, and I have come to believe that politics is not really left versus right; it's top versus bottom. It is the wealthy special interests that control our politics and control our government to a large extent, who are pitting the rest of us against each other to keep us distracted.
Right.
We have no contribution limits in the state of Texas. So
what?
Literally, these two guys can give whatever amount of money they want to any politician. You know, and so this is the government that we've chosen to have.
Yeah.
Until we put in some common sense ethics laws and campaign finance limits, you're going to continue to allow guys like Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks and other billionaires to have a lot more of a say than you do.
Oh my God.
Right? Because in a democracy, we're all supposed to have about the same amount of say, right? Like my vote matters as much as your vote.
Right.
But if you've got $1 billion and you're able to give billions of dollars to politicians, suddenly you've got a much bigger voice than I do with my one little vote.
So you've gotten money from different sources, like the Texas Sands PAC, the Charter Schools Now PAC, Charles Butt Public Education PAC, Texas Trial Lawyers, all these people.
Yeah.
What should we read into these donations?
Well, every campaign requires money. It costs money to air ads. It costs money to reach voters. It costs money to pay staff, especially if you're paying your staff a living wage. And so that money can come from a variety of sources. Most of my money comes from grassroots donors, from people who give $25, $50, $100. And we do have some larger contributors, both individuals. You mentioned Charles Butt. He's the head of HEB, the grocery store. He cares a lot about public education. He and I have a lot of the same views on those things. So he's donated to my campaign. You mentioned trial lawyers like Adam Lowy, like the Trial Lawyer Association, people who are fighting to make sure we have equal access to the courts. So when we're hurt by a big corporation, we can sue and get the money that we're owed after we've been harmed. You've mentioned casinos. I don't take money directly from casinos, of course. I actually have a ban on corporate PAC money in my office. It's a self-imposed ban that we've put in place. Again, not required by law, but there is a PAC that supports legalized gambling, which I also support. And so I also take money from labor unions, from Planned Parenthood's PAC, lots of different groups, as long as they are aligned with my policy views. And so I take money from the Sierra Club, which is an environmental organization. So it's just, I take money from a lot of different people and organizations that are committed to the same values and policies that I'm committed to. That said, I do think that we should put in place much greater limits on the amount of money that can enter our political system. And I've supported those in the past. I'm going to be introducing those going forward. But I just want to say, from a strategic perspective, I am not willing to unilaterally disarm before we put in those regulations for everybody, right? Because I think it is important.
You got to be able to play the game.
Well, and it's important to win.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, some of us don't want to talk about winning, but in a democracy, if you don't win, you're not going to help anybody.
Yeah.
Right. Like my constituents who desperately need better healthcare, better schools, better jobs, better wages, they need me to win, both in the election and also at the Capitol. Yeah. Right. Like I can give all the pretty speeches that I want, and that's not going to help anybody.
Exactly.
People are hurting and they need help.
You have to be effective.
That's right. And so I try to walk that line, which is a delicate line of putting in place some self-imposed rules, right? I don't take money from Walmart. I don't take money from ExxonMobil. They've offered me money and they've actually given me checks. And it's really hard to send those checks back when you're a legislator who doesn't have a lot of resources. But I do think it's important to have some self-imposed rules on yourself just to make sure you don't get too caught up in the system. But I also don't think you should just try to be pure on your own and unilaterally disarm before everyone follows the same good campaign finance laws that we should put in place in Texas.
You're running unopposed.
Yeah, that's right.
So you'll be taking your seat again in the Texas House in January. And other than, we've talked about the vouchers, what else are you expecting? Like, what else are you expecting this upcoming session?
Well, there are bad things that I'm anticipating, more attacks on women and immigrants and our LGBTQ community. There's sadly a certain segment of the Republican Party that every session picks a new outcast to hunt, and that will most likely be the case again next session. You saw in 2023 they banned diversity programs at colleges and universities. The session before that, you saw them go after people's voting rights. So communities of color are also at risk here. So we've got to stand up for all of our neighbors during the next session and try to reduce the harm as much as we can. But on the optimistic side, I do think there's bipartisan space to do something on early childhood and try to help our youngest Texans get a good head start in life and help new parents be able to raise kids. I want to see Texas be the number one place to raise a kid in the country. And so, there may be opportunities there. There are also maybe opportunities on healthcare and reducing prescription drug costs. I passed a bill 2 sessions ago to cap the cost of insulin in the state of Texas at $25 per prescription. And then last session, I passed a bill to import cheaper prescription drugs from Canada to help people afford their medications. I want to build on that progress this session too. And then the last area I want to continue working on is juvenile justice. So people may not be aware, but Texas still operates 5 child prisons across the state where we send kids as young as 10 years old about 500 miles from their families and lock them up in these horrendous conditions where they're being locked in windowless cells for 23 hours a day. Some of them are peeing in empty water bottles. And so I hope there's going to be bipartisan support to reform and transform that juvenile justice system to serve our most vulnerable students, because those are the most vulnerable kids in the state are the ones that are in the system, along with foster care and general child welfare. We've got to just do better by kids, whether they're in public schools, whether they're in foster care, whether they're in a juvenile justice facility. We have an obligation to those young Texans to do right by them and right by their families.
Nice. And so is there anything else that we should have asked that we didn't?
I don't think so. I think we covered so much. So no, I think this has been great.
We did cover a lot. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about these vouchers.
Yeah.
I hope to have you on again.
I would love it.
Okay, well, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Representative Talarico's website in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. And you're officially invited to our Austin in Stereo party at the Tacova store on South Congress. It's on Thursday from 5 to 8 p.m. So come join us for food, drinks, and some great Austin musicians. Hope to see y'all there. Bye, y'all.